Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Hope you've been doing well, keeping safe, keeping healthy, and taking really good notes from the videos, from my lectures, and from the videos that go along with it. You're going to want to have really, really good notes on that, getting ready for the assessment that's going to be coming up. So what you want to have out for you, of course, is your handout, and we're going to give you the overview leading up to what is episode number 5. Mississippi, is this America? 1962, 1964. Things are getting even more intense, if you can believe that. I mean, one of the things that we've seen as we've gone through this is like, oh my gosh, this is getting serious. African Americans, they want to have freedoms, they want to have equality, they want to have opportunity, they want to sit at the lunch counter, they want to go to schools, they want to vote, and that's a serious, serious thing. In this episode, you're going to be seeing African Americans and others in the civil rights movement pushing for voting rights and pushing in some of the toughest places in the Deep South during the time of segregation, in the states of Mississippi, for example, here. And the opposition is going to get tough and brutal, and yet they're just going to keep pushing, going to keep pushing, going to keep pushing, going to keep pushing. All right. We're going to be looking at the situation in Mississippi in 1964, and look at some of the things leading up to it. Obviously, last time we were seeing what was taking place in Alabama and Birmingham, ultimately successful. The protest movements in Birmingham, Alabama, with lots of international coverage, press coverage, and Martin Luther King Jr. was there, and you had all kinds of folks there putting pressure and getting some results, right? Ultimately getting President Kennedy to commit to a civil rights bill, something that would allow for the integration of not only education, but public areas, public transportation, and so forth. And so we're going to see the folks now turning their attention to Mississippi. All right, let's go ahead and load up some of our, there we go. All right, yeah, Mississippi. This is the state flag of Mississippi, by the way. Blue and white and red, very, very American colors and so forth. And we got the stars and bars, the Confederate flag, the battle flag from the time of the Civil War. And that was put as part of the Mississippi state flag, still there. The battle flag for the Confederacy. Trying to keep the old ways. It's no surprise, you see this symbol, very, very controversial symbol. And yeah, it's still part of the state flag. And of course, as we look at Mississippi, we've got two very, very strongly competing groups of people. On the one hand, there we've seen him before, Ross Barnett. He was the one that was trying very, very hard to keep James Meredith from enrolling at the University of Mississippi. Ultimately, the president and the federal courts and marshals got James Meredith in. White citizens councils were working, of course, with Ross Barnett and others to try and keep things the way they were, and we're using those organizations to not only dominate government, and of course, you know, the only people who could really vote in large numbers were whites in the Deep South, and anybody that was any African Americans and so forth that were trying to get changes and so forth. You know, you got bankers and employers and the White Citizens Council, and they were punishing African Americans who were favoring integration, and yeah, I mean, it was just tough. So who are some of the key leaders for civil rights in Mississippi? Because you need to have the details. It's going to be very important as we go forward and continuing. You need to have the details. It's not just Martin Luther King gave a speech. We got that speech last time. Lots of people are going to be involved on both sides. All right, so we got Ross Barnett as an opponent. Here we have Bob Moses. All right, so you want to add him to your list. We're going to, in the film, you're going to be taking a look and seeing some of the things that Bob Moses is very much involved in. And he was part of SNCC, SNCC. Remember that one? So what's that? Is that a pastor? or Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he was one of the organizers in the state of Mississippi, and he was pushing for a really, really big change. The right to vote. He wanted to get African Americans registered to vote and in the state of Mississippi, and that is not going to be an easy thing to do. Some of the people who were trying to vote have been murdered in the past. They had literacy tests there, right? What you had to do, like 22 questions to interpret the Constitution. And gosh, the registrar was never quite satisfied with the answers coming from an African-American voter registration person. Of course, we've seen him before. Oh, and Andrew Young from SCLC, same group that Martin Luther King was in, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So he was a pastor. And he'll be involved. You'll hear about him today. He's an interesting one because he ultimately will be in Congress. I want to say mayor of Atlanta, and then I believe it was President Carter who taps him to be an ambassador from the United States to the United Nations. So Ambassador Young, ultimately serving the United States of America. He'll be involved in the effort in Mississippi as well. And then, of course, Medgar Evers, and I think you've got a sense of the challenges that Medgar Evers is going to be facing. He's with NAACP, so I mean they're in the courts among other places, working very, very hard to try and get the rights for African Americans, including the right to vote. He was Medgar Evers organizing boycotts in Mississippi, in Jackson, Mississippi, the capital city, sit-ins. You'll see in the film various different peaceful demonstrations taking place in June of 1963. At the same time, you've got the Birmingham protests and so forth going on. Many people being arrested. But of course, this effort to get voter registration, and of course, do the opponents know where he lives? Do they follow him around? Do they threaten him? Does he stop? Does he live to see the fruits of all the work? It's on June 11th, 1963. June 11th, 1963, when John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, gives his speech announcing that he is going to be proposing a civil rights bill, which ultimately will get passed by Congress. Although Kennedy is not going to get a chance to sign it because, as we know, Kennedy's going to be shot and killed in November. It takes a while sometimes to get legislation through. But on that same night that Kennedy proposed the Civil Rights Act, Medgar Evers shot and killed as he was returning home. Basically, there was a sniper waiting outside of his house and shooting him. In the film, this documentary, 1987, no one charged. That's why it's very interesting. One of the things I've done following up from this is to look and see, you know, what actually happened. And thankfully, delayed, sometimes many years, justice is finally done. And the man, Byron Beckwith, is the man who killed Medgar Evers, shot him and killed him. He's convicted in 1994, and he's going to be sent to prison, right? Yeah, it's going to get crazy in the state of Mississippi. I've got also in this slide here a film clip, another highly recommended film. It's called Mississippi Burning, Gene Hackman, Willem Dafoe. This was done some time ago, and dealing with the missing civil rights workers in Mississippi. We're going to get into the stories of that, but just all the crazy violence and so forth going on in Mississippi, and the role that various different people, probably to be accurate, the FBI looks like they're really on top of things in Mississippi. Maybe not so much as the film portrays, but nevertheless, I'll go ahead and play this one for you now and give you a sense of major motion picture dealing with the civil rights movement and the situation in Mississippi in 1964. There we go. Let's pull this up. And it's a trailer, so I think I'm okay on the copyright. Haven't gotten zapped on one of those ones yet. Come on. Let's see it big.
am sick and tired of going to the funerals of black men who have been murdered by white men.
They are powerless against us if every single Anglo-Saxon Christian one of us stands together.
The rest of America don't see it that way, Mr. Mayor.
The rest of America don't mean a damn thing. You in Mississippi now.
Sorry.
You had us scared to death, man.
Don't you call me man, boy. Did it ever occur to them they're going to end up dead?
The moment those 3 kids disappeared, it was news.
The moment the 3 civil rights workers disappeared, it was news.
Something's called what you stand up, get out of here!
You'd kill Frank? Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't give it no more thought than wringing a cat's neck.
These people crawled out of a sewer, Mr. Ward!
We do not accept Jews because they reject Christ. We do not accept Papists because they bow to a Roman dictator. We do not accept Turks, Orientals, nor Negroes.
We're not killers. That's the difference between them and us.
That's the difference between them and you. Did you smile when the bulldozer ran over the black kid's body?
We're here to protect Anglo-Saxon democracy and the American way.
What's wrong with these people?
1964, when America was at war with itself.
Yeah, okay, there we go. That is messed up situation there. Thank you. Sorry about the tech issues there. Okay. Yeah, I'd highly recommend that one. When Kennedy was shot and killed, Medgar Evers shot and killed, civil rights workers are like, man, we're going to keep pressing this thing. We are not going to be deterred. We are not going to be put off. I mean, and so 1964 comes along. They're like, yep, we got some plans, right? Here we go, 1964, Mississippi. Summertime, they're going to call it Freedom Summer, Freedom Schools. This is going to be a coordinated effort. You're going to see SNCC involved. You're going to see CORE involved in this. SCLC, of course, is going to be supportive of this, NAACP. The real effort is going to be trying to keep the nation's attention on what is going on in Mississippi and trying to get folks to register to vote. And make sure you put this down. You got this continual pressure on the national leadership to get changes in the law. Obviously, civil rights workers, leaders were happy that Kennedy, and then after Kennedy died, his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who now is the president, move forward with the civil rights bill, right? Desegregations, we're gonna, like, you know, no more back of the bus sort of thing. But they want more. The civil rights leaders want more. They want to have the right to vote, because that's essential to being able to have influence over what the elected officials are actually doing. It's a huge, huge thing. And so there's going to be pressure, and there's going to be some tension at times too. Think about this. Make sure you put this down. When Johnson came in as president in November of 1963, right, taking over after Kennedy was shot and killed, he had a lot of public support from the country. And he's going to be able to parlay that into a lot of support for his election in November of 1964. Johnson will win election as president in his own right. In fact, it's a big victory for a Democratic candidate. I mean, it's the last time Idaho went for a Democratic candidate for president, and there were a fair number of other Republican type states that went for Johnson. And so he's going to be pushing real hard to, you know, do various different things. He's got the Vietnam War to contend with, you know, poverty issues and so forth. But he's getting a lot of pressure as well from civil rights leaders to make real changes. Not just the Civil Rights Act, but also a Voting Rights Act, something in the law to make sure that African Americans can vote, okay? And are African American civil rights workers and white civil rights workers, are they willing to go into dangerous situations like in Mississippi in order to try and get those changes made? Yeah, they are. They are. Thousands in the summer of 1964, you can write this down, over 1,000 college students, teachers, ministers, whites and blacks coming from various different parts of the country, including Mississippi, but also from the outside, from the north in particular. They're coming into the South. They're going to be running schools, so-called freedom schools. It's like we're going to get them out of the regular public schools because they're on break, and we're going to really focus on like Black history and all kinds of various different things associated with the civil rights movement. And then, of course, they're going to try and do voter registration. It's going to be real hard because African Americans in Mississippi, I mean, they know the way things have been for a long time. They got reason to be scared. I mean, some of these other folks might come in and say, hey, you know, you need to do this, that, and so forth. And they're like, uh-huh. And they're like, I don't know if I don't want to get kicked off my land or fired or have my house blown up or, you know, be burned or lynched. So this is going to be a real challenge. And of course, the, you know, white citizens councils and Governor Barnett, well, the next governor coming in, you're going to be like, this is an invasion. And what is law enforcement going to stop outsiders from coming? Yeah, because there are some overlaps between some of the local law enforcement, state law enforcement peeps, and some of the folks that don't want some of these civil rights changes in the state. In particular, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, you're going to have Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner from out of state, whites, and James Chaney. He's an African American from the state of Mississippi. And they're going to be actually on June 21st, 1964. They're going out and investigating why a African American church had been burned down. And this was actually fairly common because we've seen before churches used as organizational places, pastors taking leadership roles in the civil rights movement. And, you know, and segregation is fighting back and destroying the church. And so these guys are investigating and they're arrested for, you know, just whatever. And they're arrested near the city of Philadelphia, Mississippi, taken to jail, and then released. Yeah, sometimes that's the most dangerous time, when you're released, late at night, and somebody else is there to pick you up. Well, we know kind of what happened since then, but they disappeared. And the civil rights workers are like, our guys disappeared. President Johnson, can you help us here? Because we're not getting much help from local law enforcement, from state law enforcement. These guys are missing. The FBI, under the directorship of J. Edgar Hoover, right, and President Johnson, put out the call. There is going to be a massive search. The president brings in 200 sailors, as well as FBI agents, searching all over, trying to get clues to figure out what the heck is going on. So throughout the summer of 1964 in Mississippi, there are going to be folks looking for these missing men. And of course, the rest of the country is looking and watching and like, what the heck is going on? And yet the voting registration drive continues. 80 civil rights workers beaten up, especially the ones that are going out in the rural areas. And of course, it's 64. This is presidential election season, right? I already mentioned who's the candidate for the Democrats for president in 1964. It's Johnson, right? I mean, it doesn't have any real opposition. But like this year, you've got all these delegates who were selected from various different parts of the country, and they're going to go to a national convention. Well, civil rights workers in Mississippi decide to form up what is called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, right? There's the Democratic Party, you know, Republican Party, you know, I don't know if they didn't have much of a Republican Party back in those days. I mean, that was still tied up to Lincoln and so forth. But you get African Americans that are starting to form up an alternative to the Democratic Party that is dominated by the whites in Mississippi, and it's called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And they're getting names, and you'll get ultimately 60,000 who will sign up to be members of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And we'll see this later on. They're going to be going to the National Democratic Party and saying, hey, recognize us. We don't discriminate. Don't recognize the regular Mississippi Democratic Party because they are segregationist and they don't allow African Americans in it. And so you, National Democratic Party, Party of Kennedy, Party of Johnson, should recognize us. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on that, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Meanwhile, there's Johnson, July of 1964. with the help of his vice president, or the leader in that, who will become ultimately his vice president, Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota, they get the bill through the Senate. And of course, they have to change some of the rules because otherwise these white Southern segregationists will filibuster, filibuster, filibuster. But they get it through with support from Republicans and Democrats from outside of the South. And there he is. What does the Civil Rights Act do? It ends segregation in public areas, right? So on buses and bus stations and things like that. Are the civil rights leaders pleased with that? Sure. Is that good enough? No. What else do they want? They want protection so they can vote. And there will be, you guys know this, there's going to be constitutional amendments, and there's going to be ultimately the Voting Rights Act that are going to get rid of all those impediments ultimately to voting. The literacy tests and the poll taxes and just all kinds of nonsense that's going on in the South. But in any event, so this is going on in the summer of '64. You've got FBI agents and the Navy looking all over the place. You've got all kinds of attention going on into the Deep South, into into Mississippi. You got Freedom summer schools, 41 of them opened up with whites and blacks participating, run by the SNCC, and white volunteers going there. And of course, the whites from outside of Mississippi and the whites in Mississippi are like, oh, those guys are hippies and they're dangerous and they're invading and this is really bad. And you're like, well, yeah, we know, if you're from out of state, you're Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, and you're going around trying to help African Americans in Mississippi, you're going to disappear. Well, they ultimately found him. On August 4th, 1964, the bodies of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were found near Philadelphia, Mississippi. Their bodies had been shoved into the side of a dam, an earthen dam. And the FBI, federal agents, so forth, got a tip, and there you had it. They were killed by .38 caliber bullets. A conviction? You film, again, this documentary is done in 1987. The film points out that there were some convictions. Ooh, 7 people were sent to prison, but none more than 6 years. Is that it? For murder of 3 guys? Yeah, it was KKK. Update. Edgar Ray Killeen, killer. Killed was definitely involved and one of the leaders in killing Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner. In the year 2005, he was convicted on 3 counts and received 20 years for each one, 20 years in prison for each one. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose there is some justice there, finally. Yeah, and you'll hear, I mean, it's like more funerals. I mean, it was actually pretty sick because in the film you'll hear like they wanted to have Cheney, the African American civil rights worker, to be buried in the same cemetery as Goodman and Schwerner, but the laws of Mississippi wouldn't allow that. You have to be segregated in death as well as life. One more thing, one more part of the Mississippi story in 1964. And that is, of course, as I talked about, the presidential election. We've got the Democratic nominee, Lyndon Johnson, right? And so they're having this national convention. I don't even know if we're going to have national conventions this summer. We'll have to see. I mean, the Republicans have one, they're going to nominate Trump, right? The Democrats have one, they're going to nominate Biden. Maybe it'll all be like on a Zoom thing or so forth. But in 1964, this was a typical national convention. They had Atlantic City was the host. It was in New Jersey. It's a nice place because it's a beach resort area and so forth. And you got Democratic delegates from all over the place. And there's going to be the nomination of Johnson, and then and a speech, and there'll be the nomination of his pick, Vice President Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota. And so they'll all be there for a big party and so forth. Well, meanwhile, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is sending up a delegation to Atlantic City, and they are putting pressure on the Democratic National Party to, you know, like, put your money where your mouth is, right? You say you guys, you know, you're supporting civil rights and da 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 da, and yet you have an all-white Democratic delegation from Mississippi that doesn't allow African Americans to vote. Are you going to seat them? Well, this is putting a lot of pressure on Johnson and so forth, and they're like, oh God, yeah, so forth, right? They're going to have at the Credentials Committee Fannie Lou Hamer, right? African American civil rights leader, citizen, you know, person, who's one of the leaders of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and she's testifying at the Rules Committee and so forth. That you know, she gives her address. She's like, I am not going to be scared of all of these threats, and you, National Democrats, should give us Freedom, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. You should give us those seats. Most of them were African Americans, but there were a fair number of whites on among that delegation too. So you get this back and forth and back and forth, and of course Johnson's like, I don't know, can I win the presidency if I lose, you know, the Southern Democratic votes and so forth? He will, you know, and but it's fascinating because there's a lot of push and pull and compromise. Will there be compromise? I mean, will there be a compromise? The folks around Johnson ultimately come up with a compromise. They're like, okay, here's the deal. First, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is going to get 2 seats at large. Like, I don't know where they're going to sit, but not necessarily in the Mississippi delegation. And then the white delegation from Mississippi, they can sit in their seats and be recognized and so forth, but they have to swear an oath of loyalty to the Democratic Party. And then in future conventions, like in 1968, the next national convention for the Democrats, the delegation has to be chosen so that there would be no discrimination and so forth. So that's what the compromise was. Is that good enough for either side? I mean, that's what the National Democrats came up with. As it turns out, all but 4 of the Mississippi delegates, the white delegates, leave. They walk out. They're like, not good enough. And the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, they don't want to accept the compromise either. They're like, we didn't come up here for no 2 seats and so forth. And so they're still there and, you know, doing and so forth. But I mean, they get their point across. They're using national media attention to point out an egregious problem in the state of Mississippi, which is that African Americans can't vote. And that issue, that very, very critical issue of voting rights, is going to be front and center of the last episode. You guys are going to be checking this out latter part of this week. And that is the one where Martin Luther King Jr. and Southern Christian Leadership Conference and SNCC and all kinds of folks are going to be trying to get the voting rights in Alabama, in the city of Selma, and it's going to get intense. That's coming up in our last episode. So again, make sure you tell your classmates, make sure you get these notes, make sure you watch these videos. It's all going to be very important for your assessments as we move forward on this. Okay. All right. You guys stay safe and be healthy, and talk to you later.